It started as a seemingly ordinary day in Los Angeles. The sun was bright, the air buzzing with the usual LA energy, the scent of coffee and freshly baked bread wafting from nearby cafes. But what unfolded at the LA kitchen that day would shock the world, or at least the people who were actually there. Imagine this: a group of volunteers preparing meals for the city's most vulnerable, chatting quietly, their focus on the work at hand. Then, without warning, a sleek black vehicle rolled up outside, cameras flashing, and two of the most famous names in the world stepped out. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle had arrived. With them were their children, Archie, and the youngest, Lillibet. Or at least, that's what the official story would have you believe. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The first question that crossed the minds of the volunteers wasn't about royal protocol or photo ops. It was about authenticity. Was this visit genuine, or just another meticulously orchestrated display designed for the cameras and the tabloids? The insiders who were there would later say it felt staged, rehearsed, almost unreal. And then there was the biggest shock of all: whispers that Lillibet, the youngest member of the family, wasn't the child everyone thought she was. One volunteer, who is asked to remain anonymous, claimed that the little girl was actually 7 years old, a revelation that, if true, would contradict everything Harry and Meghan had presented to the public. You might be asking yourself, how could this even happen? How could the world's most scrutinized family, already under constant media observation, manage to pull off a deception right under the noses of people who were supposedly serving them food and helping them make an impact? And more importantly, why would they even do it? These are the questions that set the stage for what would become a day filled with tension, confusion, and, ultimately, shocking revelations that no one was prepared for. The volunteers had their doubts immediately. Some tried to rationalize the oddities. Maybe it's just nerves, one whispered. But as the day went on, small inconsistencies piled up like pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit. Timing seemed off. Interactions felt rehearsed. Smiles didn't reach eyes. And Lillibet, well, she seemed older than anyone expected, more aware, more deliberate in her movements, almost as if she understood the optics of every moment. Could a child of her supposed age really act like that? Was she being coached, or was the public being misled entirely? While the media outlets were busy releasing perfectly framed photos and cheerful statements about a day of service and smiles, those who were actually inside the kitchen had a very different experience. Cameras were everywhere, yes, but so was tension. Volunteers felt like they were on a film set, performing for an invisible director rather than simply feeding those in need. It wasn't just about charity anymore. It was about narrative control, about how the world would see Harry and Meghan, and about how the youngest members of their family would be perceived. And in the middle of it all was Lillibet, whose presence would become the focal point of speculation and, eventually, outright disbelief. You might think that volunteers would be starstruck, ready to participate in a once-in-a-lifetime royal encounter. Some were, for a brief moment. But the excitement quickly faded as subtle red flags began to appear. The children's interactions felt oddly scripted. Harry and Meghan, while charming and polite on the surface, seemed hyper-aware of every camera angle. Their movements, the way they handed out food, the smiles they gave, they were all precise, almost mechanical. And then there were the whispered remarks from staff, concerns about whether Lillibet was actually the age the public had been told. The intrigue didn't end there. As the day progressed, volunteers began noticing patterns. Certain areas of the kitchen were off-limits. Volunteers were asked to pause what they were doing for photo moments. And some were even given direct instructions on how to interact with the children. Every interaction was calculated. Every gesture was considered. And every moment, captured on camera, would later be shared as evidence of authentic charity work to the world. Yet insiders insisted it felt anything but authentic. By mid-morning, the atmosphere in the kitchen had changed. What had started as a typical volunteer day had transformed into a carefully monitored performance. Some volunteers tried to joke about it, others whispered in disbelief, and a few even grew visibly uncomfortable. And then came the tipping point, a comment from one of the staff members that would make everyone pause. They said, "I don't think Lillibet is who they say she is. She's not the age she's supposed to be." At first, it sounded impossible. Could it really be true? Was this a child actor in disguise, a clever manipulation, or just an innocent mistake? But the details began to accumulate. Observations of behavior, physical features, and interactions that seemed far too mature for a child of her supposed age all pointed toward the same shocking possibility. And suddenly, what had seemed like a benign royal visit became a story of deception, manipulation, and a day at a kitchen that no one would forget. Now, consider the broader implications. If insiders are right, if Lilibet's age and identity were misrepresented, it raises questions far beyond this single day at LA Kitchen. It speaks to the very public image of Harry and Meghan, their media strategy, and the lengths they are willing to go to control narratives about their family. It challenges everything the public thinks it knows about them, and it puts the authenticity of every carefully crafted appearance under scrutiny. You may be wondering why this story matters now. After all, the royal couple has had countless public appearances, and most have been met with admiration or skepticism, but rarely with outright claims of staged deception involving their own children. This is different. This isn't just about charity or PR. It's about trust, perception, and the hidden dynamics of a family under a microscope. The insiders who came forward were not motivated by politics or celebrity gossip. They were simply sharing what they saw firsthand. And their accounts, when pieced together, paint a picture that is hard to ignore. By the end of that day at LA Kitchen, volunteers were left with more questions than answers. What had they witnessed? How much of it was real? How much had been orchestrated for cameras and for the world to see? And perhaps most importantly, what does this say about Lilibet, the child at the center of the controversy? Was she truly a member of the family as the public knew her, or had she been used in a way that blurred the lines between reality and performance? And here's where the real shock comes in. As insiders spoke, as photos were examined, as behaviors were analyzed, a pattern emerged that seemed to confirm their suspicions. It wasn't a single slip, a momentary oversight, or a misunderstanding. It was consistent, deliberate, and undeniable to those who were there. But what would happen when the world found out? How would Harry and Meghan respond? And could the public ever separate the image from the truth? This is the story we're about to unravel. A tale of a royal visit that went far beyond charity, into the realm of deception, image control, and family secrets that few ever imagined could be exposed in a simple kitchen. It's a story of intrigue, subtle drama, and shocking revelations that will keep you questioning what you thought you knew about one of the most famous families in the world. The morning air was crisp with a hint of fog rolling off the Los Angeles streets, a rare quiet moment before chaos struck the doors of the LA Kitchen. Volunteers had begun their day early, chopping vegetables, stirring pots, and preparing to serve hundreds of meals. Their focus was on the work, on the people they would help that day. But suddenly, a sleek black SUV pulled up outside the entrance. The engine purred softly, a gentle hum that masked the storm about to hit inside. Then came the flash of cameras. Paparazzi had somehow anticipated the arrival of the world's most scrutinized couple, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. And with them, the children, Archie and Lillibet, in tow. The volunteers froze. Some whispered nervously. Others held their breath, trying not to stare too obviously. It was a surreal moment. Royalty, celebrity, and everyday people coming together in one room. But the energy was far from ordinary. The first thing anyone noticed was how carefully orchestrated the entrance appeared. Every step was timed, every glance measured, as if Harry and Meghan had rehearsed their walk from the car to the door 100 times. As they stepped inside, the cameras caught smiles that seemed flawless, effortless, but there was a subtle tension in the air. Volunteers would later describe it as a mix of awe and discomfort. Harry's eyes scanned the room with a precision that bordered on clinical, while Meghan's posture and gestures were polished, rehearsed, a dance perfected over years of public appearances. It wasn't the warmth of a casual visit. It was a performance. Every inch of their movement was calculated, and the children followed the cues perfectly. Archie looked curious, a little shy, tugging slightly at his mother's hand, but Lillibet was another story. From the very moment she stepped through the doors, she exuded a confidence and awareness that seemed unusual for a child of her supposed age. Volunteers would later comment on how she seemed almost too poised, too deliberate in every motion, like she knew exactly how to present herself for the cameras. It wasn't typical playful behavior, it was calculated. The first interaction set the tone. A volunteer reached out to offer a tray of food to Meghan, expecting a brief nod or smile. Instead, Meghan's hand hovered for a moment, paused deliberately, and then moved with exact precision as a photographer captured the moment. It was surreal, one insider recalled. It felt like we were part of a movie set, not a kitchen. Every volunteer, no matter how excited to meet royalty, sensed something was off. And then there was the subtle body language between Harry and Meghan. To the casual observer, they appeared happy, charming, affectionate. But those who were inside the room could see the micro-expressions, the tiny flickers of tension. Harry's jaw tightened at one point. Meghan's eyes darted to a volunteer's phone as if monitoring for unauthorized photographs. Even their smiles, though perfect on the surface, seemed like a mask. This wasn't a family simply arriving to help others. It was a family aware of every gaze, every angle, every lens. Questions began forming immediately in the minds of those watching. Was this warmth real, or was it carefully curated? And what about the children? Could Archie and Lillibet be as natural as they appeared in the polished media images? Or were they performing too, guided by unseen hands? Volunteers noticed subtle cues, gestures, the way Lillibet stood slightly apart at certain moments, the fleeting hesitation before a wave or a smile. It raised questions. Had this visit been rehearsed down to the tiniest detail? And if so, why? The arrival wasn't just about optics. It was about control. Every step seemed timed to ensure the perfect shot, the perfect impression, the perfect story for the public to digest. Staff members later admitted that they were quietly instructed on how to move, where to stand, how to react. The kitchen had become a stage, and everyone inside had been unknowingly cast in a role. Volunteers as background actors, children as props, Harry and Meghan as the stars. Yet, despite the orchestrated environment, there were moments of real human emotion that broke through. A volunteer accidentally tripped, and Meghan quickly extended a hand in genuine concern. Harry laughed lightly at a joke someone made, his guard dropping for a split second. But these flashes were fleeting, like glimpses behind a curtain. They were quickly masked by the carefully maintained veneer of composure and poise. One volunteer described it as a disorienting experience. You're excited to see them, but also unsettled. You don't know if you're being genuine with them, or if they're just performing for you, too. The idea that a simple volunteer encounter could feel staged, almost theatrical, was a revelation in itself. It set the tone for the rest of the visit, suspicion creeping into every smile, doubt lurking behind every handshake. Then came a moment that would stick in everyone's memory. Lillibet, standing next to her brother, looked directly at the cameras, smiled with precise timing, and nodded as if acknowledging an audience. Volunteers later noted that the way she carried herself seemed almost too mature for a child of her age. Every movement, every glance, every expression was deliberate, as if guided by someone or something beyond the normal expectations of a child. It made them question everything about what they were witnessing. The age of the child, the authenticity of the family interactions, the very nature of the visit itself. And there was another element that heightened suspicion: timing. Certain moments were paused for photos, interactions frozen, gestures repeated to capture multiple angles. Volunteers observed that every detail seemed to have been considered in advance. The process was mechanical, precise, and meticulously planned, leaving little room for spontaneity. Even the smallest, seemingly insignificant details, the way a tray of food was handed over, the tilt of a head, the placement of a hand, felt calculated. Yet, for the public seeing only images and short clips online, it would have looked like a joyful, heartwarming royal family engaging in a day of charity. The contrast between the polished media narrative and the insider experience could not have been starker. Volunteers began to notice small inconsistencies, subtle contradictions, and hints that not everything was as it seemed. And as the morning wore on, these observations would accumulate, forming a web of suspicion that would set the stage for the shocking revelations yet to come. By the time the first set of meals was served, volunteers were already questioning everything. They asked each other quietly, Why did the children behave in such a calculated manner? Why did Harry and Meghan's interactions feel so rehearsed? And most pressing of all, if everything seemed staged, how deep did the deception go? Was this simply a PR visit, or was there something more significant hiding beneath the surface? And just when the tension seemed to peak, a volunteer noticed something that no one had expected. Lillibet, during a seemingly innocent interaction, displayed a level of awareness and precision in her gestures that made everyone stop in their tracks. Could a child of her supposed age really act like this naturally? Or was this the first hint of the shocking truth, that she might not be the age she was publicly claimed to be? This was the moment when reality began to unravel. The arrival, which had initially seemed like a simple ceremonial visit, had set off a chain reaction of observations, doubts, and questions that no one could ignore. Every volunteer present now had the same nagging thought. Something about this day, this visit, and this family wasn't what it appeared to be. And as they prepared for the next stage of the visit, little did they know that the revelations ahead would challenge everything they thought they knew about Harry, Meghan, and their children. From the moment she stepped into the LA kitchen, Lillibet had everyone talking. At first glance, she appeared to be the sweet, curious, playful child that the public had come to expect from the youngest member of the royal family. But volunteers quickly began noticing subtle details that didn't quite add up. The way she carried herself, the way her eyes scanned the room, and the precision in every gesture suggested a level of awareness unusual for a child of her claimed age. Could this really be the same Lillibet the world had seen in polished photographs, or was there more beneath the surface? The first sign that something was amiss came from a simple observation: behavior. Children of a certain age are naturally spontaneous, playful, often unpredictable. They trip, they giggle at unexpected moments, they get distracted. Lillibet, however, seemed almost hyper-aware of her surroundings. Every smile, every hand movement, every nod was timed perfectly. Volunteers described her as deliberate, precise, almost rehearsed. One volunteer whispered to a colleague, "She's too perfect, too aware. This isn't normal for her age." This wasn't just speculation. Photographs taken that day, which later surfaced online, seemed to confirm what volunteers had noticed. Side-by-side comparisons of Lillibet and Archie revealed a stark contrast. Archie displayed typical childlike curiosity and occasional clumsiness. Lillibet, on the other hand, appeared composed beyond her years, posing almost like a miniature adult at times. To the trained eye, every movement was purposeful, controlled, and unmistakably deliberate. Questions began to mount. Could Lillibet really be the age the royal family claimed? Or had she been misrepresented for public appearances? One volunteer, who had worked with children professionally, noted that the behaviors displayed by Lillibet were more consistent with a child at least 2 or 3 years older than claimed. The gestures, facial expressions, and even the way she responded to adults suggested maturity beyond what would be expected for a child of her supposed age. Adding fuel to the speculation were reports from staff who had interacted with her more closely. They described moments that seemed almost calculated. The way she handed food to volunteers, how she engaged with Archie, and how she positioned herself when cameras were present. One insider recalled, "It's like she understood the optics of every moment. It was unsettling. I kept thinking, no child should behave this way naturally." The inconsistencies didn't stop at behavior. Observers also noted physical characteristics that seemed incongruent with her supposed age. Height, facial features, and even the size of her hands and feet appeared more developed than expected. Volunteers, many of whom were parents themselves, began quietly comparing notes. "It's subtle," one said, "but when you notice it, you can't unsee it. Something isn't adding up." This curiosity quickly escalated into concern. Staff began to wonder whether Lillibet had been intentionally presented differently for public appearances, a calculated narrative designed to protect privacy or shape perception. Could this visit to the LA kitchen have been another carefully curated performance, where the children were guided to project the perfect image while maintaining an illusion about their age and identity? The notion that Lillibet's age might have been misrepresented was not just a passing thought. It became a central question in the minds of those who witnessed the visit firsthand. Volunteers who had previously been excited to meet royalty now found themselves scrutinizing every movement, every interaction, every photograph. They were no longer seeing children. They were seeing actors in a performance, participants in a story carefully orchestrated for the cameras. And yet, despite the mounting evidence, some volunteers wanted to believe in innocence. Perhaps it was wishful thinking, a desire to trust the royal family, or simply disbelief that such a thing could be possible. Maybe she's just advanced, one volunteer suggested. Maybe it's normal for her age. But even the most charitable explanations failed to account for the meticulous timing and awareness displayed throughout the visit. Social media, of course, provided a starkly different perspective. Photos released online showed smiling faces, choreographed gestures, and moments of apparent joy. The public saw the image that Harry and Meghan wanted them to see. A happy family performing charity work, children behaving impeccably, smiles for the cameras. But insiders knew that reality was far more complex. Behind the carefully staged photos, every movement, every smile, every gesture had layers of intention, observation, and control that went unnoticed by the broader public. This dissonance between image and reality became the topic of whispered conversations among volunteers. Some began to document what they observed, sharing notes and photographs that captured the subtle differences between Lilibet and her public image. These records later became central to debates about the authenticity of the visit. They suggested a deliberate attempt to manage perception, a controlled environment where appearances mattered more than reality. As the day progressed, more anomalies became apparent. Lillibet seemed unusually calm when interacting with strangers, including volunteers who were handing her trays of food or directing her movements. Most children would fidget, seek comfort from a parent, or react unpredictably to new environments. Lillibet, however, maintained composure, exhibiting a level of patience and awareness that unnerved those around her. Volunteers began to speculate. Had she been coached, trained, or guided to behave this way? And if so, by whom? The question of authenticity extended beyond behavior to interactions. Observers noted that Lilibet's exchanges with Archie appeared almost staged. Moments of sibling play or affection were brief and perfectly timed for cameras. There were pauses, calculated movements, and gestures repeated until captured correctly. The impression was that the children were aware of the audience, even when no one else in the room seemed to notice. This led to deeper questions about the nature of the visit itself. If the children were performing, to what extent was the entire day orchestrated? Was the charity work genuine, or simply a backdrop for a highly controlled narrative designed to present the family in a certain light? Staff who had been inside the kitchen described an atmosphere where authenticity was secondary to optics, where every movement was carefully monitored, and where Lilibet's age and behavior were crucial to maintaining the desired image. The growing suspicion about Lilibet's true age sparked private conversations among the volunteers. They compared notes, analyzed photos, and discussed behaviors that didn't align with what they expected. The consensus began to emerge. Something about Lilibet was not as it appeared. She was too composed, too aware, and too deliberate in every gesture to be a child of the age publicly claimed. And yet, no one could articulate exactly why this mattered, at least not until further observations made the implications clear. If Lilibet was indeed older than claimed, it raised serious questions about the public narrative surrounding Harry and Meghan's family. It suggested that appearances could be manipulated, carefully controlled, and misrepresented, even in settings designed to convey authenticity, like a day of volunteer service at a soup kitchen. As volunteers continued to observe, the sense of unease intensified. The children's behavior, the family's interactions, and the orchestrated nature of the visit combined to form a picture that contradicted everything the public had been shown. Insiders began to realize that this day was not just about charity. It was about perception, narrative control, and possibly even deception. And then came the moment that truly unsettled everyone. During a seemingly innocent exchange, Lillibet displayed an understanding of camera angles and timing that no child of her alleged age should possess. She positioned herself perfectly, waited for the right moment to smile, and then delivered the expression with flawless timing. Volunteers watched in stunned silence. Could it really be natural, or had she been coached? And if coached, by whom? And for what purpose? This observation crystallized the volunteers' growing suspicions. The carefully managed behavior, the deliberate gestures, the awareness of the audience, it all pointed to the same conclusion. Lilibet might not be the child the public had been led to believe. The implications were staggering, and the atmosphere in the kitchen grew thick with tension. Conversations became hushed. Eyes flicked nervously. Phones were discreetly raised to capture the moment. Everyone wanted to document what they were witnessing, but even as they did, they realized that the narrative outside these walls would not match what they had seen firsthand. The moment volunteers thought they understood the dynamics of the day, it became clear that the visit was far more orchestrated than anyone had imagined. What had initially seemed like a spontaneous, heartwarming interaction between the royal family and LA kitchen volunteers revealed itself as a carefully choreographed performance. The signs were subtle at first, a pause here, a glance there, but by the time the first photo op occurred, it was impossible to ignore. It started with a simple request. "Could you hold that tray just a little higher?" A volunteer hesitated, unsure what was happening. Then a photographer stepped in, adjusting angles, suggesting small tweaks. Every movement became deliberate. Harry and Meghan smiled, nodded, and interacted as instructed. Every gesture was calculated to appear natural, warm, and charitable, but insiders who were observing saw the meticulous precision beneath the surface. What should have been organic interactions instead felt staged, rehearsed, and, at times, uncomfortable. One volunteer later recalled that they had been told to freeze during a specific moment so the cameras could capture a candid interaction. It was a moment that was supposed to look natural, but the instruction revealed the artificiality. "I kept thinking, is this real?" the volunteer said. "I felt like I was on a movie set, not volunteering at a kitchen." Every smile, every pat on the back, every handshake was carefully choreographed to create the perfect image. Lilibet's behavior was particularly striking during these moments. She seemed aware of when cameras were pointed at her, timing her gestures and expressions with uncanny accuracy. Volunteers noticed that when photographers were not watching, she moved differently, less polished, more natural, but as soon as the lenses turned toward her, she transformed. This added to the growing suspicion that the family, particularly the children, were being coached or guided to create a specific narrative for public consumption. The sequence of stage photo ops was extensive. Each interaction, from serving food to handing out drinks, was timed and repeated until it appeared flawless. Volunteers were directed to position themselves strategically to interact with the family in ways that would enhance the desired images. Even the smallest details. The tilt of a head, the direction of a gaze, the placement of hands, were scrutinized and adjusted. What should have been a simple volunteer day became a meticulously controlled production, with Harry and Meghan at the center, orchestrating the narrative with precision. Insiders also noticed the psychological impact this orchestration had on volunteers. Some were excited to be involved in a royal visit, eager to participate and document the experience. Others felt manipulated, uncomfortable, and even complicit in a performance they hadn't agreed to be part of. The contrast between the public perception of a spontaneous charitable visit and the behind-the-scenes reality created a sense of tension and unease that persisted throughout the day. Humor, of course, was not absent from the proceedings. Volunteers found moments of absurdity in the meticulous staging. One staff member joked about needing a production schedule for a soup kitchen, while another remarked that they felt like extras in a Hollywood film rather than participants in a charitable effort. Yet beneath the humor was an undercurrent of disbelief. How could a simple act of service be turned into such a carefully managed spectacle? The scale of the staging extended beyond individual interactions. The layout of the kitchen, the positioning of volunteers, and even the movement of the children appeared designed for the cameras. Insiders noted that certain areas were off-limits unless cleared by staff, and volunteers were sometimes asked to pause what they were doing to accommodate a specific shot. The feeling of being constantly monitored created an environment that was equal parts awe-inspiring and unsettling. Perhaps the most striking aspect of these stage photo ops was how seamlessly they maintained the illusion of spontaneity. For the public, every smile, every gesture, and every interaction seemed natural and genuine. The polished images presented in news articles and social media posts created the impression of authenticity, masking the underlying orchestration. Volunteers knew, however, that every moment had been carefully crafted to project the ideal narrative. A royal family committed to service, children behaving perfectly, and a day of charity captured flawlessly for the world to see. And yet, the more volunteers observed, the more they realized that even the children were participating in this performance. Archie, though slightly less calculated than his sister, seemed attuned to the presence of cameras. Lillibet, on the other hand, displayed a level of awareness and control that was remarkable for someone her supposed age. Every smile, every nod, every small movement was timed to perfection, creating the illusion of innocence and spontaneity while simultaneously fueling suspicions about authenticity. The meticulous nature of the staged photo ops raised deeper questions. Was this simply a well-managed public appearance, or was there an element of deception involved? Could the family's carefully crafted image be hiding something more significant about the children and their interactions? Volunteers could see the difference between public perception and private observation more clearly than anyone. The more they watched, the more obvious it became that the images presented to the world only told part of the story. Even small details that might have gone unnoticed to outsiders took on new significance. A volunteer mentioned that a camera angle caught Lilibet looking off to the side for a split second, a gesture that seemed to signal awareness beyond her years. Harry's hand placement, Meghan's subtle nods, and the timing of smiles all suggested a level of orchestration designed to maintain a flawless appearance. Every interaction reinforced the notion that the family was performing a narrative that suited their own objectives rather than engaging in genuine volunteer work. By mid-morning, the cumulative effect of these staged photo ops began to affect volunteers' perception of the entire visit. What was supposed to be a day of service and goodwill had become an elaborate performance, blurring the lines between authenticity and artifice. Volunteers began whispering about the children's behavior, the timing of gestures, and the orchestrated nature of the interactions. The sense of curiosity, initially sparked by subtle inconsistencies, had evolved into a deeper, more unsettling realization. They were witnessing a story carefully constructed for the cameras, a story that may not have fully reflected reality. And then came a moment that would escalate suspicions even further. During a particularly elaborate photo op, Lilibet stood perfectly poised, hands clasped, eyes looking toward the lens, and delivered a smile so timed it appeared almost rehearsed. Volunteers described feeling a chill run down their spines, a sudden awareness that what they were seeing was more performance than spontaneity. Could a child really possess such calculated awareness? Or was this part of a carefully orchestrated plan orchestrated by adults guiding every step of the day? This moment crystallized a growing understanding among the volunteers. The visit was no longer just a royal appearance or charitable gesture. It was a carefully controlled narrative, designed to project a particular image of the family to the public, one that masked the underlying reality of the day and potentially the true nature of the children's identities and behaviors. As the staged photo ops continued, volunteers were left with lingering questions. How much of what they were witnessing was genuine? Were the smiles real, or were they simply performing for the camera? And most importantly, what did this orchestrated performance reveal about Lilibet and the family's broader narrative strategy? By the end of the morning, it was clear that what had been presented as a straightforward charity visit was in fact a complex, highly managed spectacle. Every detail, from camera angles to hand gestures, had been considered and executed to maintain the perfect image. Volunteers began to realize that behind every smile and photo was a story of careful control, timing, and perhaps subtle deception. And just when the day seemed to settle into a rhythm of rehearsed interactions, an unexpected comment from a volunteer would challenge everything they thought they knew, and the events that followed would shock everyone in the kitchen. From the moment Archie arrived at the LA kitchen, volunteers couldn't help but watch him closely. Unlike his sister, Lilibet, whose movements were precise, deliberate, and unerringly aware of cameras, Archie appeared more typical. He fidgeted, shifted his weight from one foot to another, and occasionally tugged at his mother's hand. On the surface, he seemed like a normal child, curious and responsive to his surroundings. But as the morning progressed, subtle patterns emerged. Behaviors that were far too consistent to be accidental, raising questions about how much of what people saw was innate and how much had been influenced or coached by adults. The first indication came during a seemingly innocent activity, distributing meals to volunteers. Archie eagerly reached for trays, smiled at those around him, and spoke in short, polite sentences. To anyone unfamiliar with child behavior under scrutiny, it appeared charming, natural, and even spontaneous. But insiders noticed a rhythm, a cadence to his movements and speech that suggested guidance. He paused at just the right moments to allow photographers to capture the interactions, waited for cues from Meghan, and even seemed to follow subtle instructions without any overt direction. While he lacked the unnerving precision of Lillibet, Archie's actions suggested a level of awareness that went beyond what one might expect from a typical 4- or 5-year-old. Volunteers described him as attentive, observant, and unusually composed for a child in a bustling, crowded environment. He was paying attention to everything around him, one volunteer said. Every movement, every look. He seemed aware of who was watching. The contrast between the siblings became increasingly apparent as the morning unfolded. Lillibet moved like a miniature actor performing for a script she had memorized, while Archie navigated the space with a balance between spontaneity and learned behaviors. In moments when no cameras were present, he allowed himself to be more relaxed, playful, and unpolished. Yet, even in these unscripted moments, volunteers noted subtle signs of training. The way he avoided stepping into areas marked for staged photographs, how he approached adults with cautious politeness, and how he mirrored his sister's cues when attention shifted toward Lillibet. Archie's interactions with volunteers revealed another layer of complexity. He responded with politeness, but also demonstrated patience beyond what would typically be expected of a child his age. When a tray was handed to him too quickly, or when a volunteer fumbled a small task, he didn't become frustrated or distracted. Instead, he waited calmly, making eye contact with a level of composure that volunteers found unusual. It was almost as if he had been taught to maintain a calm exterior no matter what was happening around him, a subtle skill designed to ensure he projected the ideal image at all times. This observation prompted further speculation. Was Archie naturally composed, or had he undergone guidance and training to behave in a manner suitable for public appearances? Volunteers began quietly comparing him to other children in similar environments, noting the disparities. While most children his age would struggle to maintain focus or composure under constant observation, Archie seemed to adapt quickly, adjusting his behavior to suit the situation. And then there were the moments of sibling coordination. Even when not directed by adults, Archie seemed to instinctively follow patterns set by Lillibet. If she paused for a photograph, he would subtly adjust his posture, timing, or expression to align with hers. These moments weren't obvious to the casual observer, but for volunteers present in the kitchen, they were impossible to ignore. The siblings' synchronized behavior added to the growing sense that the family's public appearances were meticulously managed. Volunteers also noted how Archie responded to the presence of cameras. While he occasionally glanced toward lenses, his expressions were softer, more natural than his sister's, but still unusually controlled. It was as though he had internalized the expectation of performing in front of an audience without needing explicit instruction. He was aware, one volunteer recalled. He didn't have to be told what to do, but he did exactly what was needed when the cameras were on. This awareness extended to interactions with the adults in the room. Volunteers observed that Archie mirrored the behavior of staff and family members, a subtle but effective method of blending performance with natural engagement. He smiled when prompted, nodded at appropriate moments, and maintained composure even when unexpected events occurred. The overall impression was of a child who, while seemingly innocent and spontaneous, had been carefully guided to behave in ways that ensured consistent appearances for public consumption. The patterns in Archie's behavior raised larger questions about the purpose and planning of the LA kitchen visit. Was the family simply using these photo opportunities to present a polished, controlled image, or were they deliberately training the children to act in a specific way for public appearances? Volunteers began to speculate that the visit itself was as much about managing public perception as it was about performing charitable work. Every interaction, every pause, every smile had a dual function, serving the immediate purpose of volunteering and reinforcing the broader narrative of a perfect, charitable royal family. Humor and lighthearted moments were not absent. Archie occasionally whispered something to his sister, pointed at a volunteer's shoes, or reacted with curiosity to an unfamiliar object. But even these moments seemed to serve a dual purpose. They maintained the appearance of natural childlike behavior while simultaneously adhering to an unspoken script of decorum. Volunteers noted that these bursts of spontaneity were carefully timed, brief, and often interrupted by subtle cues from Meghan or Harry to resume composure. By late morning, volunteers had developed a clearer understanding of Archie's role in the visit. He was both a participant and an observer, learning, adapting, and performing simultaneously. While his sister exhibited overt signs of rehearsed awareness, Archie blended natural curiosity with subtle guidance, creating an image of innocence that was almost indistinguishable from performance. This nuanced behavior made it difficult to separate genuine childlike interaction from deliberate public presentation. The more volunteers observed, the more they realized that the children's behavior was central to the family's narrative strategy. Lillibet's precise, rehearsed actions presented an image of maturity and composure, while Archie's controlled innocence provided balance, a believable sense of spontaneity that reinforced the family's public image. Together, they created a composite portrayal of the ideal royal family, one that was carefully curated and maintained in every moment of public exposure. And yet, even as volunteers marveled at the children's behavior, questions continued to swirl. How much of what they saw was natural? How much was guided, coached, or rehearsed? And most importantly, what did this reveal about the true nature of the visit and the family's broader approach to public appearances? By the end of this chapter, it was clear that Archie's behavior, while seemingly innocent, was layered with complexity. His interactions, timing, and awareness raised questions about authenticity and training, and hinted at a larger narrative carefully managed by the adults in his life. Volunteers were left with a lingering sense of intrigue and unease, realizing that what had appeared to be a simple charitable visit was, in reality, a sophisticated performance in which every participant played a role, whether knowingly or not. And just when they thought they understood the children's behavior, an unexpected incident during the afternoon would challenge every assumption they had made and push the story into shocking new territory. By mid-afternoon, the LA kitchen was buzzing, not with the usual rhythm of volunteers chopping, stirring, and serving, but with a tension that was almost tangible. While cameras and the stage photo ops created an illusion of calm and purpose for the public, those inside the kitchen were seeing a very different reality. Volunteers, many of whom had been preparing meals for years, began whispering, taking notes, and exchanging looks that conveyed disbelief, confusion, and even frustration. They were witnessing a meticulously managed spectacle, yet it was far from smooth. Behind the polished smiles of Harry, Meghan, and their children, chaos simmered beneath the surface. The first whispers began during the tray distribution. Volunteers had been instructed to hand off food in a particular order, pause at specific spots for photos, and move according to a schedule that seemed almost absurdly detailed for a charitable visit. Some volunteers openly expressed frustration. "I've been volunteering here for 10 years, and I've never followed a step-by-step script like this," one said under her breath. Another whispered, "It's like we're part of a movie set, not a kitchen." The tension escalated as staff struggled to balance serving the meals and accommodating the royal family's orchestrated movements. Volunteers described moments where they were literally frozen mid-action while Harry or Meghan waited for cameras to capture the perfect angle. One volunteer recalled, "I was holding a tray of soup for what felt like 5 minutes, trying not to move, while a photographer adjusted their camera 3 times. The kids were standing still, smiling, and I thought, this is not real. None of this is real." Amid this chaos, volunteers began to notice cracks in the polished performance. Lillibet, for example, occasionally glanced at her mother with subtle cues, a tilt of the head or a blink, that seemed to signal adjustments in her posture or expression. Observers realized that even the children were being subtly coached in real time, and the volunteers themselves were part of the unfolding performance. It wasn't just about them, one staff member said. We were props, extras, part of a bigger show. Volunteers also started to speak out about the emotional impact of being caught between genuine charitable work and orchestrated appearances. One longtime volunteer admitted feeling manipulated, torn between excitement at meeting royalty and discomfort at being instructed how to move or react. I wanted to enjoy the experience, she said. But every time I smiled or handed a tray the wrong way, someone was correcting me. It was exhausting, and honestly, it felt wrong. Another volunteer, a parent of two, focused on the children. Archie was sweet, very polite, she said. But Lillibet, there was something different. She was too aware, too poised. It didn't feel like a normal child at all. These observations, shared quietly at first, quickly multiplied as more volunteers compared notes. By the end of the afternoon, nearly everyone inside the kitchen had noticed something unusual about the children's behavior and the orchestrated nature of the visit. The chaos was compounded by the constant presence of photographers and assistants, ensuring that every moment was captured perfectly. Volunteers described how aides would intervene subtly, redirecting the children or prompting gestures, sometimes without even drawing attention. These small interventions reinforced the performance, maintaining the illusion of spontaneity while controlling the narrative. You didn't notice it at first, one volunteer said, but then you realized nothing was happening by accident. Everything had been arranged, managed, and timed. Despite the tension, humor persisted as a coping mechanism. Volunteers joked about the absurdity of the situation. I felt like I needed a traffic light to hand out soup, one quipped. It's like we were running a military operation instead of feeding people. But beneath the jokes was an undercurrent of frustration and confusion. The contrast between their usual experience, simple, heartfelt volunteer work, and the meticulously managed performance of the royal visit was stark, disorienting, and sometimes infuriating. Many volunteers noted the psychological toll. Some felt as though they were walking on eggshells, constantly aware that a misplaced step or awkward glance could disrupt the carefully curated image. Others admitted feeling disappointed that the focus seemed to be more on public perception than the actual work of serving the community. I've never felt so torn in my life, one volunteer said. I wanted to help people, but I kept feeling like a pawn in a bigger game. Some volunteers also expressed concern over the media narrative that would emerge. Photos released to the public painted a perfect picture: smiles, warm interactions, and a day of charity with children behaving impeccably. But behind the scenes, volunteers knew the story was far more complicated. They saw the pauses, the coaching, the micro-adjustments that ensured every detail appeared flawless. The contrast between what the public would see and what they had experienced was jarring. As the visit progressed, volunteers began to piece together the pattern: orchestrated movements, coached children, and precise interactions with adults. Each staged moment revealed a layer of control that extended beyond the immediate photo ops. The realization was unsettling. The visit was less about serving meals and more about managing a narrative, one that presented the family in a carefully crafted light. Volunteers who had initially been starstruck began to see the visit through a lens of skepticism and intrigue. And yet, the chaotic nature of the day also produced moments of raw, unfiltered emotion. Volunteers caught small glimpses of Harry and Meghan in private. Harry quietly checking on a volunteer who had dropped a tray, Meghan softly whispering encouragement to a child. These fleeting instances revealed a complexity beneath the polished performance, a human dimension that was rarely captured on camera. But even these moments were brief, quickly absorbed back into the broader choreography of the visit. By mid-afternoon, volunteers had formed a collective sense of incredulity. They exchanged observations about Lilibet's precise behavior, Archie's subtle awareness, and the overarching orchestration of the event. We were witnessing something extraordinary, one volunteer said. It was like a masterclass in performance art, but set in a soup kitchen, and the children were central to it. This realization sparked more pointed questions. Why was so much control necessary? Were the children simply guided to behave for appearances, or was there a deeper motivation behind the meticulous staging? Could the discrepancies in behavior hint at truths that were being concealed from the public? Volunteers began to sense that the carefully maintained image of a perfect royal family might be masking something far more significant than they had imagined. Even as the volunteers tried to focus on the work, serving meals, cleaning up, and assisting in the kitchen, the lingering sense of intrigue and disbelief remained. The experience had become an intricate puzzle, one that volunteers couldn't stop analyzing. Every glance, every gesture, every microexpression carried potential meaning, and they found themselves questioning what was authentic and what was performance. And then, during a brief lull in activity, a volunteer overheard a comment that would ignite a new level of suspicion. It was subtle, almost casual, but it hinted at a secret beneath the surface of the carefully managed visit, a truth that, if revealed, could change everything. Volunteers froze, exchanging shocked glances, realizing that the day's events were building toward a revelation that no one outside the kitchen could have anticipated. It was clear that the volunteer perspective offered an unfiltered glimpse into the chaos and orchestration behind the public performance. What appeared as a straightforward visit had evolved into a tightly controlled spectacle, layered with subtle coaching, managed behaviors, and carefully timed interactions. Volunteers were left grappling with questions about authenticity, manipulation, and the role of the children in this carefully constructed narrative. And just when they thought they had seen it all, an incident in the kitchen would shock everyone present and force them to confront a reality that went far beyond staged smiles and orchestrated photo ops. It was mid-afternoon, the busiest and most chaotic part of the visit. Volunteers had settled into a rhythm of serving meals, positioning for photographs, and managing the constant choreography demanded by the royal family's presence. But just when it seemed the day's orchestrated performance would continue without disruption, something happened that none of the volunteers, staff, or even the family could have anticipated. The incident began innocuously. A volunteer carrying a tray of soup slipped slightly on the kitchen floor. In most kitchens, this would have been a minor moment, a stumble, perhaps a spill. But the combination of cameras, rehearsed timing, and the presence of Harry and Meghan transformed the situation into something far more dramatic. The volunteer regained balance, but the slip caught the attention of the children. Lillibet froze momentarily, her perfect composure intact, but Archie's reaction was immediate. A startled gasp followed by a small movement toward the volunteer as if to help. Observers in the kitchen were struck by the stark contrast in responses. Lillibet, ever aware of the cameras, maintained her pose, her gaze and expression unaffected by the minor disruption. Archie, however, displayed genuine, unfiltered concern, a spontaneous, human reaction that hadn't been coached or planned. Volunteers noted the authenticity of his response, a small but powerful reminder that beneath the meticulously controlled performance, there remained traces of true childhood innocence. But then something even more startling occurred. As Archie approached to help, he accidentally bumped into a nearby table, sending a stack of meal trays clattering to the floor. The sound echoed through the kitchen, instantly drawing attention. Volunteers gasped, some frozen in shock, while others moved instinctively to assist. The family, previously composed and controlled, reacted immediately, but the reactions were revealing. Harry's hand shot out to steady Archie, a quick gesture that was protective yet revealing in its unfiltered nature. Meghan moved toward Lillibet, offering a reassuring whisper and a brief pat on the shoulder, her attention divided between maintaining composure for the cameras and ensuring the children were okay. For volunteers, the incident shattered the illusion of perfection. In that split second, the carefully managed choreography unraveled, revealing glimpses of reality beneath the performance. Archie's genuine concern, the children's subtle reactions, and the adults' unscripted responses created a moment of raw, human emotion that stood in stark contrast to the polished narrative being broadcast to the world. Volunteers whispered to each other, trying to make sense of what they had witnessed. Could these unguarded moments reveal the truth about the family's dynamics? Or were they anomalies carefully absorbed back into the performance? The impact of the incident extended beyond the immediate disruption. Photographers scrambled, trying to capture the moment while maintaining the desired framing, but the authenticity of Archie's actions could not be staged. Volunteers began to realize that no matter how carefully the day had been orchestrated, certain moments, the instinctive reactions of a child, the subtle, unplanned movements, could pierce the veil of controlled appearances. The incident exposed a vulnerability in the family's otherwise flawless presentation, and it left a lingering sense of tension in the kitchen. Adding to the complexity, Lilibet's behavior following the incident was revealing in its own way. While she initially maintained composure, volunteers noticed a subtle shift in her eyes, a quick glance toward her mother that suggested awareness of the disruption and possible guidance in response. She continued her duties flawlessly, but the small, fleeting sign indicated that even within the stage performance, there were layers of real-time adaptation and instruction happening beneath the surface. Volunteers were captivated, analyzing every micro-expression, trying to discern what was genuine and what was guided. The kitchen, which had been a site of orchestrated precision, now pulsed with raw energy. Volunteers scrambled to manage the spill, help the children, and maintain the flow of the day. The incident revealed cracks in the polished narrative, creating moments of tension, unpredictability, and, ultimately, fascination. For the first time, the volunteers felt they were witnessing the human side of a family that often seemed untouchable in media portrayals. The juxtaposition between performance and reality was stark, and it provoked intense discussion among staff. What made this incident even more shocking were the reactions of the children afterward. Archie, still processing the event, displayed a mix of concern and curiosity, turning to volunteers to see if anyone was hurt. Lillibet, on the other hand, resumed her choreographed movements seamlessly, as if nothing had occurred, her precision almost eerie in its return to form. Volunteers described the contrast as striking and unsettling, highlighting the dichotomy between unfiltered childhood innocence and learned, coached awareness. The incident prompted volunteers to speak out in ways they hadn't before. In hushed conversations during breaks, staff shared their observations about the children's behavior, the orchestration of the visit, and the moments that had shattered the illusion of perfection. One volunteer remarked, "I never thought I'd see something so staged and so real at the same time. It's like watching a play with actors who suddenly forget their lines, but only for a second." Another added, "It makes you wonder. How much of what the public sees is real, and how much is carefully crafted?" Beyond the immediate reactions, the incident sparked deeper questions about the broader implications of the visit. If a minor slip and a few spilled trays could reveal authentic behavior, what did that say about the family's public appearances? Were other carefully staged events similarly vulnerable to moments of truth? Volunteers began to speculate about the training, coaching, and guidance that might be applied to ensure consistency across media portrayals, and what such practices could imply about the children's development, autonomy, and the authenticity of the family narrative. The unexpected incident also served as a turning point for the volunteers' perception of the day. Initially captivated by the novelty of a royal visit, they now found themselves analyzing, questioning, and even scrutinizing every interaction. The blend of performance and reality, exemplified in Archie's instinctive reaction and Lilibet's controlled composure, highlighted a complexity that no social media post or news article could capture. Volunteers were seeing the invisible threads of orchestration, guidance, and spontaneous human response all at once. And yet, just as the volunteers were beginning to process what had occurred, another twist emerged. A subtle comment from a staff member, a fleeting glance from an aide, and a whispered instruction to one of the children hinted at something far more deliberate and intentional behind the visit. A hidden layer of control, secrecy, and purpose that had not yet been revealed. The volunteers realized that the incident, while shocking, was only the beginning. By the end of Chapter 6, it was clear that the unexpected incident had shifted the entire dynamic of the day. What had seemed like a carefully orchestrated performance now included elements of unpredictability, authentic human emotion, and glimpses into the true behavior of the children. Volunteers were left grappling with questions that went far beyond the kitchen, about perception versus reality, coaching versus authenticity, and the hidden narrative behind the royal family's public image. By the late afternoon, the LA kitchen visit had concluded, and the world outside was beginning to react. Photos, short video clips, and curated social media posts began circulating almost immediately, painting a picture of a perfectly orchestrated, heartwarming royal family volunteering in Los Angeles. The public saw Harry and Meghan smiling warmly, the children behaving impeccably, and an image of effortless charity. But for those inside the kitchen, the reality was far more complex, nuanced, and, at times, chaotic. The contrast between public perception and behind-the-scenes events would become a central narrative in the hours and days that followed. Within minutes of the first posts going live, the reactions on social media were explosive. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, all platforms buzzed with a mix of awe, admiration, and criticism. Fans and critics alike debated the visit with intensity, dissecting every frame, every gesture, and every smile. Hashtags like #RoyalVisitLA, #Harry and Meghan, and #Lillibet went trending worldwide. Volunteers watching the online frenzy found themselves shocked by the perception gap. For the public, the visit seemed flawless. For those on the ground, it had been a meticulously choreographed performance peppered with moments of raw unpredictability. Some posts highlighted the apparent innocence and charm of Archie and Lillibet. Such well-behaved children. One user gushed, while another remarked, "Lilibet is already stealing the spotlight at age 7. But volunteers recalled the careful orchestration behind those moments, the subtle coaching, positioning, and guidance that ensured the children looked perfect on camera. What the world perceived as natural grace was, in reality, the result of meticulous planning and real-time adjustments. Other social media users focused on the charitable aspect, praising the family's dedication to service. "Inspiring to see royals giving back," one commenter wrote. "Truly role models for the next generation." Yet volunteers knew the visit had been far from spontaneous. Every interaction, every tray handed out, every smile captured on camera had been timed and managed, leaving questions about authenticity that the public could not see. "It's strange," one staff member said. "People think we just had a simple charity day, but it was like being on a movie set. The cameras never left us, and the children were always directed subtly, even when it didn't look like it." As posts multiplied, so did speculation. Some users began dissecting body language, tone, and timing. "Notice how Lilibet never blinks during photos?" One meme read, highlighting the child's unnerving composure. Others pointed out Archie's small but consistent movements, questioning whether the children had been coached for the visit. Volunteers, reading these observations, felt a mix of amusement and disbelief. Outsiders were picking up on the subtleties that even some in the kitchen had only begun to notice. The social media storm also included criticism, with detractors accusing the family of staging the entire visit. "This is so fake," one post declared, accompanied by screenshots of photos showing carefully positioned hands, perfectly timed smiles, and children seemingly frozen in place. Another user commented, "It's like watching a movie instead of a charity event. Totally orchestrated." Volunteers recognized the truth behind these claims. What the public often assumed was perfect behavior was indeed the product of guidance, training, and careful management. Yet, even critics on social media didn't have the full story, which included chaos, spills, coaching moments, and unplanned reactions that never made it into photos. The juxtaposition between perception and reality was stark. Social media, as always, focused on surface-level beauty, charm, and celebrity allure. Volunteers, who had lived through the day, understood the deeper dynamics, the meticulous staging, the subtle real-time coaching, the tension between authenticity and performance. This gap between what the public saw and what actually occurred would become a recurring theme in discussions surrounding the visit, feeding into debates about celebrity culture, media manipulation, and the power of narrative control. Interestingly, some volunteers noted that the social media frenzy had unexpected consequences inside the kitchen itself. As posts went viral, the family remained focused on maintaining their composure, seemingly unaware or unconcerned about the narrative taking shape online. Volunteers felt a strange sense of dissonance, watching the children's rehearsed smiles and gestures mirrored and praised by an online audience completely removed from the chaotic, staged reality. "It's surreal," One volunteer said, "We lived it. We saw every misstep and adjustment. But online, it looks perfect. Everyone's applauding something they didn't actually see." The conversation online also began touching on the age and authenticity of Lilibet. Some observers questioned whether the child was truly 7, speculating that she appeared older or more poised than expected for her age. Memes, video analyses, and commentary emerged, suggesting that the child's public persona might have been carefully cultivated or even manipulated to fit a narrative of precocious sophistication. Volunteers, reflecting on their experience, recognized the subtle signs they had noticed firsthand. Lilibet's uncanny timing, her awareness of cameras, and the micro-guidance she received throughout the day. Amid the praise and speculation, another layer of discussion emerged, the performative nature of the adults themselves. Harry and Meghan, consistently poised and coordinated, were scrutinized for every interaction. Users debated the authenticity of their smiles, their gestures, and their engagement with volunteers. Social media users dissected what appeared to be micro-moments of coaching, interpreting them as evidence of careful orchestration. Volunteers, however, understood that these moments were both spontaneous and directed. Harry and Meghan maintained a balance between authentic reactions and controlled presentation. As evening approached, the social media storm showed no signs of slowing. Videos and photos continued to circulate, with influencers and news outlets commenting on the children, the charity, and the family's behavior. Volunteers observed these reactions with a mix of incredulity and validation, realizing that what they had witnessed behind the scenes was now being partially decoded by the public, even if most people still only saw the polished surface. One volunteer reflected, "It's amazing how much people can pick up from a photo or video. Even without knowing what really happened, they notice the subtle cues, the behavior of the children, the interactions. But they still don't see the full picture, the chaos, the coaching, the slips. They just see the perfect moment." The volunteers' insights, if shared publicly, would have dramatically altered the narrative. But instead, social media created its own version of the story, sometimes critical, sometimes adoring, and always focused on the curated image of perfection. For those who had lived the day, this dissonance was striking. They had seen the imperfections, the orchestrations, and the moments of true emotion, yet the world outside only absorbed the surface-level glamour and charm. And as the night fell, volunteers reflected on a new, disconcerting realization. Social media had amplified the family's narrative, often unknowingly. The perfectly captured images, the seemingly innocent smiles of the children, and the flawless presentation of the visit had been transformed into a global